So now we have arrived here, I suppose, and also, maybe sensing, what it does to chant a chant like this. It's like a technology, for attuning the nervous system to what we are doing here. It's not just, chanting for making a nice sound for somebody or, a devotional practice, but it's also an attunement process, which can be quite powerful. I can feel it now, in my body. It's very different. There's much more spaciousness in my, torso in particular. Here, it feels almost like a little bit, a lot, It's an ancient technology, and it has a powerful effect on us if we, have the capacity to allow it to happen. So, starting with my reflection now, many of us come to the Dhamma because of a deep need for the human heart, the citta, to place itself in the vast scheme of things, to have a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, which can then, help us to activate the resilience and the energy we need to stay in relationship to what's happening. So it's like a journey of discovery, which, is the lever for leaving behind limited and limiting assumptions of who we think we are, and the systems around us. And this letting go of limited and limiting conditioning happens through looking at our direct experience in a different way than usual, in a different way than what the culture dictates, which is mainly about what can I get. And that practice, has the potential to open up our world into new vistas beyond the current cultural paradigm of extraction and consumption, which is like starting to crash. And, leading to an expansion of perception by, applying the liberating teachings of the Buddha, but also a more intuitive and poetic vision of who we are and where we are in the sense of, living as a human being on this planet or in this planet at this time in history. Where there is like a shift making itself known, and, I can feel it in my bones, but it's hard, to articulate what is happening. But there's also it's clear, we can't go back to how it was before, before COVID or something like that. But we are now in this kind of very uncertain, shaky territory between paradigms. And that happens from time to time. It has happened, many times before. But maybe for us, or for me at least, I'm 68 years old, for me it's the first time. Because, when I was born, it was all about, this is all so controllable, and we have all of the technologies and the machines to make it all as we want it to be. And now we have tried that, and it's not working, and it has made things worse. So I'm really full on, feeling the collapse of that hope, and I don't wanna get buried under it, but I wanna use it for growth. And one of the practices, which have always been very supportive for me is the practice of the sound of silence, as I have received it, from Ajahn Sumedho, as an entryway into expanded perception of myself and my world. And the sound of silence isn't a practice which is actually mentioned in the Theravada scriptures. It's mentioned to a certain extent in the Mahayana scriptures as a practice, which was introduced by Kuan-Yin Bodhisattva. But in the Theravada scriptures is not mentioned, but there is other, systems of practice such as Sufi practice and Hindu practice, where the sound of silence is mentioned with different names. And Ajahn Sumedho, stumbled upon it by himself without having heard about it, and then started to work with it and saw the benefit of it, how it helps us, to open the mind out very wide. And the way how he has been teaching it, it was like he called it a form of listening. And at that time, 30 years ago or so, the way how I received it from him was, I was listening here. It was very helpful. You can't really hold a concept in your mind and ruminate about it, contracting around the thought and listening to the silence. You can't do that both at the same time. You either do this one or like this. And that was very helpful way, of helping to let go of mind patterns. But then, as I have been practicing over time, for me the listening was like dropping down into the body as I became more and more aware, of the deep embeddedness in the biosphere. I was kind of starting to listen to the biosphere, what the biosphere is communicating on an energetic level. And so I started to listen with my whole body and becoming aware of the vibrancy, the aliveness, which permeates my whole body, but also that which is beyond the boundary, the so-called boundary of the skin, the aliveness in the space around my body and the aliveness in all phenomena, the tree outside here and everything. So it became a listening with the whole body rather than with the mind, and a sensing rather than a listening. And the word listening, just using that as a manner of speaking, because it helps to give the sense of the vastness and the I don't know how to really say, it's because it's not, because when we are listening, you're getting in touch with something which we can't see. It's sound, and that automatically, requires some kind of different way of attending than if we are touching, for example, or tasting. It's a very refined sense, I think. So it's like listening with the whole body to something refined, which can be felt only if there's a certain slowing down and turning towards. So a sensing with the energy body. which is a coming together, of 5 elements: earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, space element. And of course, the body of the planet is made of exactly the same elements. And we are constantly exchanging with the body of the planet through eating, drinking, and breathing. We are constantly eating, drinking, and breathing the planet, actually. And because of that, we are it. So the earth, speaks to us through our bodies, the vibrancy, the aliveness of our energy bodies. And we can sense into that aliveness. And then, as we are feeling, sensing that, we also become aware that the aliveness doesn't stop at the skin, but it's everywhere. And once we have attuned to our bodies and the aliveness and vibrancy of our bodies, then these bodies can become kind of receptor sites for the energetic communication with the earth, and the earth is a self-regenerative, self-organizing system, which has been taking care of life, for almost 5 billion years. And this intelligence is an expression of what I call the Dharma, I think that the planet expresses intelligence, the laws of nature. And, there have been many attempts made, by humanity to try to crack the code, with science and with rather, attempt to try to dominate her and squeeze out all of her secrets, including all of the so-called resources. And that has led, to the exhaustion of this cultural paradigm. And now a new time is beginning where, if we'd like to stay on here, we need to have a different relationship, a relationship of respect, reverence, and participation. So what I try to suggest is, to practice that listening as a devotional practice, and asking for guidance on a physical level. I'm not expecting that the earth is going to talk to me and say, Santacitta, do this, do that. No, but it's an attunement process, where my own internal wiring is going to be adjusted out of the old paradigm of domination and control into a visceral appreciation of my participation as a cell, participates in the vast body it is a part of. A cell isn't inspiring to understand and control, because it's just a small, tiny thing. So, that kind of listening, that's what I try to practice. And we just simply starting where we are and allowing this steady vibration to change our relationship to the biosphere. And the body knows how to do this. It regulates itself in relation to that vibrational presence which is in and all around us, if we give that the space to happen, If we are constantly kind of thinking about things and it kind of contracted around it, there's no space for that attunement to take place. It's almost like, new neural pathways have to be opened up. New old neural pathways, I would even say, because our indigenous forebears they have been able to viscerally experience their participation. But then, because our culture hasn't been handing down that information, those pathways have gone offline, so to say, and now we need to bring them back online. And that's a bit of a, confusing, uncomfortable process, because we are basically opening up avenues, which have not been used for a few hundred years. It's not a long time, in comparison to how old human bodies are, on an evolutionary level. But still, we are out of touch. And it's like relearning a language we once spoke, We don't need to start completely from scratch, but it's not going to be like just one session, So, and it all starts by, working with imagination a little bit, like, in a Vajrayana practice, visualization is used a lot, to create whole worlds, mandalas, pure lands, and so on. And in our case, just simply imagining, that we are inside the planet, like an earthworm or a cell or a mole or whatever you like to be using for this. And the atmosphere, which is filling this room, and of course beyond the room as well, I can't see it, but I know it is not nothing, because if I kind of do like this, I'm gonna be dead very quickly if I don't breathe in oxygen. So, not being so glued to our sense organs in their, kind of everyday functioning, that they cannot necessarily help us to experience ourselves as participants of planet Earth. But if we kind of add a little bit of imagination and then relate to the body as an organ of listening, then a new vista opens up. And that's what I'd like to introduce to you today. And before, we're going to shift into guided meditation, I also want to share something else which became apparent to me. I was thinking about the sound of silence, and then when I was writing down my notes, I used the short version, and then I saw actually sound of silence is like SOS, which is a Morse code distress signal, which is used internationally. And then I was thinking, the planet is giving this distress signal, which we can hear, but in the sense of, hey, please pay attention for your own sake. The planet is gonna happily go on without us. No problem, we cannot, it's not about us saving the earth, but it's more allowing us to be saved by the earth. That's what the only way forward is, if there's any, because it's impossible for us to, yet another control project. Now we are saving the earth. Before we just tried to squeeze all of her secrets out of her, and now we change tack and we're gonna try to save her. It's just the same paradigm, it's just kind of not working. And Albert Einstein is on record for having said, you can't fix a problem from the same level of consciousness which created it. So that's not working. But we can allow ourselves to be saved by the earth by being attuned. Like when you go and play in an orchestra, you bring your instrument and you attune it to the orchestra so you can be part of the harmony, what is going on there. And the earth listening, the SOS, listening to the SOS of the earth, is that exactly that, trying to attune to her communication, and then more and more becoming a participant and letting go of the old paradigm of control and fear of not enough, mixed up, with original sin and all of that amazing luggage, which we need to really let go of because it's not helpful. It might have been helpful a few hundred years ago for some elite people, to control other people, but now we don't really, there's no benefit. But it's deep, deep, deep in us, and we need to come out of that. And I think attuning to the earth as our sounding board is a very good option at this time. And, using some inspiration we can glean from indigenous societies, nations, we still have kept it alive because they had the technologies for it. They have the stories, they have the ceremonies, they have the rituals, they have the respect, because they were brought up like this. And they are only 6.2% of the global population, and they are quickly getting a lot of pressure. And I find a lot of inspiration from several indigenous teachers. I've learned a lot. Pat McCabe, a Diné ceremonial leader, and Tiokasin Ghost Horse, a Lakota teacher, and Akan Lushwala, teacher from Peru. So a lot of what I teach these days is informed by that wisdom. And when I was young, before I became a nun, I studied cultural anthropology because I felt very drawn to that way of living. And now I've come full circle and bringing together these two wisdom traditions at a time where we are, at the end of our theta in terms of Western scientific approaches. And before we go into the meditation, and calling all of that, what I try to share, the other AI, ancestral intelligence, which can help us, to not get carried away into a direction which is like totally nonsensical. And combining that, with the liberating teachings of the Buddha is the much needed update, for Buddhism to really land in the Western world, land on the lands, not just in the white middle class meditation centers. So, find a posture which you can sustain for about 30, 25 minutes. And sensing the body on the cushion on the chair. And sensing your body and how what I've said, how that has landed in you. Hearing that from, I'm a white, middle-class, cisgendered woman brought up in Austria in a small town, and, I came to the US when I was already 50 years old and have lived in Asia and Europe before. And then calling to mind our ancestors who knew belonging to earth in their bones. And calling to mind future ones whose lives will be shaped by what we decide to do or not do. And then bringing to mind all the present ones. Indigenous peoples all around the planet struggling, to keep their territories safe, and many of them not succeeding in that. Huge heat wave in Europe. And then, trusting that we can choose how we want to show up in this process. We are still part and parcel of the systems to a big extent. Yes, that is true. But we can participate with awareness and with the intention to be part of the immune system of the planet. And becoming expressions of that emergence, which is, calling us that urge to evolve and becoming an expression of the self-regenerative intelligence of this planet. With our particular gifts, our talents, our location in life. And trusting, that the future wants to emerge through each of us, and we can sense into that. We can sense into that. That aliveness, that vibrancy, or that living energy, which can also present, as a sound of silence, a high-pitched tone, which we might hear, or it might present as a tone, high-pitched tone in the ears. And however it presents, it doesn't really matter. What matters is it gives the mind an object, a very quite refined object to steady itself on. In the same way as the body, rests on the cushion on the chair, the mind can rest on the sound or on the vibrancy, the aliveness. And as awareness rests on that, also sensing the whole body, and then boundaries, seem to drop away, and there is just aliveness, not ending at the walls of the room, but limitless. So imagining, oneself as inside of Earth. The atmosphere, goes up many miles. That's not like nothingness. That is, we call it the atmosphere. It has, it consists of many different gases, and, oxygen being very important for our species for staying alive. And, there's a quote by James Hillman, who was an American Jungian psychologist, and he says, to sense deeply we must imagine, and to imagine accurately we must sense. So, to really be aware that spaciousness, that aliveness, that vibrancy is part of what keeps us alive. And there's a constant exchange, every breath is an exchange. And the oxygen, which we are breathing in, was maybe, inside the body of a dinosaur or whatever other interesting creature you can imagine. The mystery of that. It really helps to create space and a sense of participation in something so much vaster than our daily, challenges. Even they are also true. but coming, into the middle of these two extremes. If it's all so terrible or it's all so whatever, wonderful. And coming to the middle. And saying, yeah, there's a lot of challenges, but there's also something new emerging in the midst of the challenges. We are squeezed, into a new way of relating. So whenever the mind, wanders off into thinking about something, coming back to the body as an organ of listening. And, knowing in our bones that we have this capacity to be in relationship. We just have not been exercising it for quite a long time now. But it can be brought back online because all of us have indigenous forebears in their lineage. And to remember our indigeneity to this planet. By listening to the SOS of the biosphere, wanting us to return, to turn around and stop moving in a direction, we don't even know where we are going, but just going fast, going far, going whatever, and not really knowing where we are going. Why we don't stop and check it out, what is this all about? And then if you sense into the gravity, there is already the direction. We belong here. As long as you are a human body, you need to be here because here's the food, here's the water, here's the oxygen. There's nothing of that kind on Mars or on the moon. It's just a rock. And every little thing we need to take from there to... It's so crazy. Why don't we take care of this? This is the challenge. And not falling for all of these narratives of what some kind of crazy people who want to make a lot of money, who still think they can eat money, are doing. And really coming back to the basics. And that's really, seeing the wheel of samsara is gone really, really fast. And then it just grinds against reality, of what it means to be human, needing to eat, drink, and breathe. And allowing that perception, to become visceral again. Letting go of the fascination with technology that it can save us. Now we can use it, and we need computers even to connect in this way, but we don't need to become completely fascinated by it and fall for all of these crazy narratives about AI and AGI. That's all just like a new kind of sort of drama of inevitability, which is like complete rubbish. And coming down from that complexity into the simplicity of the energetic experience of aliveness, vibrancy, and that urge to evolve and respond as a participant of planet Earth. And just drop that whole domination story. We're at the end of that one. And even Buddhism, has been handed down inside of the old story. Buddhism isn't like exempt. Even the core teaching, the liberating core teaching is excellent, but also it has been packaged up in different ways. Because it has been handed down by humans. And they all needed to eat, drink, and breathe and needed support. So Buddhism isn't like a neutral teaching. There is no neutral anything. And that's not bad, but we need to be aware of it. Buddhism has been handed down inside of patriarchy in particular, and the nuns can sing a great song about that. We're still not really recognized, as fully ordained nuns in quite a few circles and lineages today. So I give you a few minutes to just sit now and experiencing that aliveness, vibrancy, and welcoming the update. So as we are slowly, coming to the end of the sit, just gonna share a short poem by Anne Hillman, and it's called We Look with Uncertainty. We look with uncertainty beyond the old choices for clear-cut answers, to a softer, more permeable aliveness, which is every moment at the brink of death. For something new is being born in us, if we but let it. We stand at a new doorway, awaiting that which comes, daring to be human creatures, vulnerable to the beauty of existence, learning to laugh. We stand at a new doorway, awaiting that which comes, daring to be human creatures, vulnerable to the beauty of existence, learning to laugh. That's, like a melting process. It feels very odd, in the body and confusing. And, the stretch of growth to allow that to happen. And doing it together makes it a little bit more doable.